Millionaire hotel owner Malik was standing in the middle of his own lobby, and no one had a clue. In dark gray maintenance overalls, a utility belt at his waist and a battered cap pulled low over his brow, he blended in perfectly with the morning rush of staff and guests at the Crown Meridian Hotel, the flagship property of his luxury chain. For the first time in years, he felt invisible. That was the point. But he did not expect to freeze because of three quiet words from a black maid who had just been humiliated in front of the entire lobby. "You remind me," she whispered. Her voice was low and hoarse from holding back tears. When she lifted her eyes toward him, Malik felt the air leave his lungs. The uniformed maintenance guy she was looking at, the one who had simply stood there with a toolbox in his hand, watching everything, suddenly felt as if the floor had shifted beneath his boots. He was 43 years old, the self-made owner of one of the most prestigious hotel groups on the East Coast. He had negotiated nine-figure deals and stood on stages accepting awards for visionary leadership. Yet three small words from a cleaning lady hit him harder than any boardroom battle he had ever fought. 10 minutes earlier, he had watched his general manager, Trevor Langford, destroy this woman's dignity in front of dozens of guests. "The accusation is very serious," Trevor had announced, his cultured voice echoing off the marble columns and crystal chandeliers. "A diamond bracelet doesn't just disappear." Dozens of eyes had turned toward her. Her name tag said, Lena Brooks, housekeeping. She was in her early 50s with warm brown skin and streaks of silver in her tightly coiled hair, pulled neatly into a bun. Her uniform was immaculate. Pressed navy dress, white apron, comfortable black shoes slightly worn at the seams. She held her cleaning cart like an anchor while Trevor's words cut through her. "A guest says she left it on the nightstand," Trevor continued, standing tall in his tailored charcoal suit. "And now it's gone. You were the last person in that room." His pale blue eyes narrowed. "People like you always find a way to take what isn't theirs." "Mr. Langford, Security," Trevor snapped, lifting a manicured hand. "Search her. Properly. We have standards to maintain." Two security guards stepped forward. Conversations halted. The pianist at the lobby bar faltered and stopped mid-note. Guests lifted their phones. Children stared until their parents pulled them aside with awkward, tight smiles. The guards began to go through Lena's bag, then her apron pockets, then the compartments on her cart. Bottles of cleaning solution, folded towels, a neatly wrapped sandwich, a small Bible with worn edges, an envelope with bus passes and receipts. The older guard looked uncomfortable. The younger one moved with the stiff professionalism of someone who didn't want to think too much about what he was doing. Lena stood still, chin slightly raised, face burning but composed. Malik saw her fingers shake as one guard turned her lunch bag upside down, spilling crumbs and a bruised apple onto the shining marble. "Nothing." "Sir," the guard muttered, "there's nothing here." Trevor didn't apologize. He didn't even flinch. "Check the room again," he said sharply. "Maybe our guest had the sense to use the safe." 5 minutes later, the report came in through his earpiece. "Mr. Langford, we found the bracelet. It was inside the room safe, just as you said." Trevor let out a breathy laugh, as if this were mildly annoying but ultimately trivial. "Well then," he said, already turning away. "Crisis averted. Make sure the guest gets a complimentary bottle of champagne for the inconvenience." He did not look at Lena. He did not speak to her. He simply walked off, his Italian leather shoes clicking across the marble like punctuation marks to a sentence he didn't care to finish. The lobby began to breathe again. The pianist resumed playing a cautious melody. Guests drifted back into their own worlds, though some still glanced at Lena with that look, the one that said, "Maybe she didn't do it this time, but—" Lena quietly gathered her scattered belongings. She brushed crumbs from the floor, repacked her lunch, tucked the small Bible back into her bag, and straightened the cleaning cart as if this were any other mess in any other room. That was when she realized someone was still watching. The maintenance guy. He had stood there the whole time, leaning against a marble column with a tool case at his feet, his dark eyes taking in every detail. He hadn't spoken up. He hadn't intervened. But he also hadn't looked away. When their gazes finally met, something shifted. She walked slowly toward the service corridor, pushing her cart. As she passed him, she hesitated for just a fraction of a second and lifted her head. "You remind me," she whispered, her voice cracked but steady. Malik felt like she had reached into his chest and pulled out a memory he had buried under layers of success in polished boardrooms. It wasn't just what she said, it was how she said it, like someone who had once known a different version of him. He watched her disappear through the staff door, her back straight, her steps measured like a queen forced to walk across broken glass with her crown still on. For a moment, the lobby noise blurred into a distant hum. He was no longer standing in the Crown Meridian's gleaming entrance hall. He was 16 again, in a faded polo shirt and cheap black pants, carrying a busboy tray through a fancy downtown restaurant. "Kid, you have potential," his old manager had said, lips curling into something that wasn't quite a smile. "But don't forget your place. People like you should be grateful just to be here." Back then, people like you had meant a skinny black kid from the projects, wearing secondhand shoes that pinched his toes, riding 2 buses to get to a job that barely paid for his textbooks. He had swallowed the humiliation so hard it burned, and he had promised himself that one day he would build something so big that no one could ever tell him to know his place again. 2 decades later, he had done it. He owned the place. But standing there in that lobby, disguised as a maintenance worker in his own hotel, Malik suddenly realized something terrifying. In becoming the man at the top, he may have stopped feeling the crushing weight at the bottom. How many Trevors had he hired over the years? How many Lenas were cleaning his rooms, being quietly crushed while he studied occupancy rates and expansion plans? The anonymous reports of racial discrimination he had received over the last 6 months suddenly felt like more than exaggerations or isolated incidents. He had told himself he'd look into them. As soon as the next merger was complete, as soon as the quarterly numbers were in, as soon as never. Until that moment. Until, "You remind me." He retrieved his tool case, heart pounding, and slipped through the staff door Lena had used moments earlier. The fluorescent lights in the service corridor hummed softly, a sharp contrast to the glittering lobby. The air smelled like cleaning supplies, laundry steam, and something else, fatigue. He found Lena at the back of the house, in a small supply room lined with shelves of fresh linens and bottles of disinfectant. She was alone, leaning against a metal rack, breathing slowly as if she had to count each inhale to keep from breaking apart. Malik stayed in the doorway for a second too long. She sensed him there. "If you came to say you're sorry for not saying anything," she murmured without looking up. "Don't. It's not the first time." Her voice was soft, but there was steel in it. Malik cleared his throat. "I just wanted to make sure you're okay." She let out a small, humorless laugh and finally met his eyes. "Okay," she repeated. "I've been working here 15 years, Mr. Jamal," he lied smoothly. He'd picked the alias a week ago when he decided to go undercover. "Jamal Reed, new on maintenance." "Jamal," she said, tasting the name like she was testing if it fit. "If I got torn apart every time someone like Trevor pointed a finger at me, I wouldn't have survived my first month." She picked up a folded stack of sheets, her hands steadier now. "It just gets old, you know," she continued. "Being loyal, showing up early, covering other people's shifts, doing the work no one sees. And the only time you become visible is when something goes missing." Malik felt a familiar anger rise inside him, the same burning he'd felt as a teenager when a customer in a restaurant had assumed he was stealing tips, just because he lingered too long at a table to clear extra plates. "You said, in the lobby," he began carefully, "you said, you remind me." "Of who?" For a moment he thought she wouldn't answer. Then she tilted her head and studied his face with unexpected intensity. "There was a boy in my neighborhood," she said slowly. "Westbrook Towers. South Side." Malik's breath caught. Westbrook Towers. Concrete towers. Broken elevators. Kids playing basketball on cracked courts. His childhood. "He used to work nights at a diner downtown," she went on. "Always smelled like fries and coffee. Always had a textbook under his arm. People talked to him like a nobody, but his eyes," she smiled faintly. "His eyes were always somewhere 10 years into the future." Her gaze locked onto his. You have those eyes, she whispered. That's all. She didn't say his name, but in that instant, he knew. She remembered him, not as Malik Davenport, millionaire hotel owner on magazine covers, but as Malik from Building 4B, the kid who used to sprint down the stairs with a cheap backpack and big dreams, who nodded respectfully whenever he passed the cleaning lady from 3C. Lena Brooks. He had never connected the name on her badge to the tired but kind woman who used to walk 3 kids to the bus stop in a faded uniform and sensible shoes. Time and success had blurred so much, but she had recognized him beneath the overalls and cap in a heartbeat. And he had almost missed it. Westbrook, he repeated softly. You still live out there? Can't afford to leave, she said with a small shrug. Not on a housekeeper's salary. But my eldest made it to college. Norfolk State. 2nd year. My twins are finishing high school. Pride flickered across her face, bright and fragile. They'll do better than I did. That's the point, isn't it? Yes. That had always been the point. So why had he forgotten to make sure his empire didn't become the same machine that once tried to crush him? Listen, Ms. Brooks, he began. Lena, she corrected gently. Lena, he said. The name felt heavy with history on his tongue. What happened out there was wrong. Wrong is when someone gives you the wrong room key, she replied. What that was. That's just how it is. For people like me. He heard Trevor's voice in his head. People like you. Something in Malik snapped into focus. It wasn't just one manager losing his temper. It wasn't just one mistaken bracelet. It was a system he had allowed to grow in the shadows of the brand that carried his name. That night, in the modest corporate rental apartment he had chosen as his undercover base, Malik sat at the small dining table with a cheap notebook and a burner phone. He stared at the page for a long time before writing the first line. Investigate. Trevor Langford. Then underneath, investigate. Every complaint I ignored. He dialed a number he hadn't used in years. Ezra Cole, a familiar voice answered after the second ring. Civil Rights Division. Ezra, it's Malik. Silence. Then a low whistle. Damn, I thought you were too rich to call old friends anymore. I need your help, Malik said quietly. The kind you specialize in. Systemic discrimination, patterns, receipts. He exhaled slowly. Inside my own company. Ezra didn't sound surprised, just tired. Took you long enough to realize the monster grows under your own roof, man, he said. You got evidence? I will, Malik replied. By the end of the week. When you're ready, send everything, but be smart, Ezra warned. You're walking into your own building as a ghost. That's power, if you use it right. After they hung up, Malik stared at his reflection in the dark window. The man in the glass wore cheap overalls, but behind his eyes was the same 16-year-old who had sworn never to become the kind of boss who used people up and threw them away. Somewhere between IPOs and magazine covers, he had lost sight of that promise. 3 words from a black maid had dragged it back into the light. Over the next 3 days, Malik moved through his own hotel like a shadow. He tightened a loose fixture in a hallway while listening to supervisors assign the worst shifts to the same group of employees with darker skin. He pretended to check a thermostat while a receptionist whispered that some guests feel uncomfortable when housekeeping looks too rough. He swapped air filters in the manager's office while Trevor bragged on a call about keeping the staff in line and not letting long-timers think they're irreplaceable. Every casual remark was another crack in a facade Malik had spent 20 years building. Every quiet sigh from an exhausted worker was another reminder of Westbrook Towers. Every time he saw Lena pushing her overloaded cart down a hallway, helping younger staff, covering for someone who had to go home early to a sick child, mediating conflicts with calm patience, he realized something else. She was doing more to hold this place together than half the people on his executive payroll. And the man he'd trusted to run his flagship hotel had decided she was a threat. By the end of the week, Malik had a notebook full of dates, names, and incidents. He had overheard Trevor say more than once that loyalty could be a problem when it came from the wrong people. That old-timers like Lena were too proud for their own good. That a shakeup in housekeeping might be necessary to refresh the culture. Malik knew corporate code when he heard it. Trevor wasn't just humiliating Lena, he was preparing to get rid of her. And he had the perfect method. create impossible standards, blame her for failing to meet them, then toss her out under the guise of performance issues. Professional execution wrapped in a performance review. Malik had seen ruthless strategies in boardrooms. He had never expected to see one aimed at a woman who carried extra napkins in her pocket because she knew which guest children would spill their juice. As he lay awake that night on the narrow apartment bed, Malik realized something else. He wasn't just gathering evidence against one manager. He was preparing to put his entire empire on trial. And if he did this right, justice wouldn't just be a private apology behind closed doors. It would be a public reckoning. For Trevor, for the silent policies that allowed men like him to thrive, and for the 16-year-old boy inside Malik who had once scrubbed someone else's floors and dreamed of building something better, for people exactly like Lena. The three words that had stopped him in the lobby were no longer just a memory. They were a mission statement, and the countdown to the day everything would explode had already begun. By Monday morning, Malik had already seen enough to know that what happened in the lobby was not an accident. It was a pattern. It was in the way schedules were drawn, always pushing the heaviest loads onto the same group of employees. It was in the jokes in the break room that only went one way. It was in the promotion board on the HR wall, pale faces in framed photos, and then far below, a sea of brown and black uniforms that never seemed to make it past supervisor. But the turning point came in the basement meeting room, under flickering fluorescent lights and a yellowed ceiling. Housekeeping was gathered for the daily briefing. Metal folding chairs scraped the floor. The air smelled of coffee, bleach, and exhaustion. Malik stood at the back, pretending to fiddle with an electrical outlet, his toolbox open at his feet. Trevor Langford stood in front of a whiteboard, arms folded, wearing the practiced smile of a man who had never mopped a floor in his life. "Good morning, team," he began, his voice bright and false. "We have a new quality initiative starting today." A murmur ran through the room. New quality initiative always meant more work, same pay. "Starting this week," Trevor continued, "all cleaned rooms will be inspected twice, once by the assigned housekeeper and once by a rotating supervisor. We're tightening standards." He turned, picked up a marker, and began drawing a diagram of floors and zones. The housekeepers looked at each other. Malik watched the way shoulders tensed, the way lips pressed into thin lines. "Now," Trevor said, capping the marker, "given the importance of our top-tier guests, the presidential wing needs particular attention." He let that sink in. "As you all know, the presidential wing houses our most expensive suites," he went on. 30 units, each over 2,000 square feet. High expectations. Important clients. No room for mistakes. He turned to the crowd and his eyes fixed on one person. "Lena," he said smoothly, "as our most experienced employee, I'm assigning you full responsibility for the presidential wing this week." The room fell silent. Everyone knew what that meant. 30 enormous suites, endless details, impossible time constraints, plus the regular emergencies that always cropped up. Special requests, last-minute checkouts, VIP arrivals. It was more than one person could handle, even at a sprint. Lena sat up straighter, her hands folded in her lap. Only the slightest tremor in her fingers gave her away. "Yes, sir," she said quietly. Malik felt his jaw clench. Trevor smiled, the picture of benevolence. "I knew I could count on your dedication. Of course, any failure to meet standards will be documented." He let his gaze drift toward the rest of the staff. "And will be reflected in end-of-month evaluations. We're all professionals here. We all understand accountability." He closed the meeting with a few empty platitudes about team spirit and brand excellence. As chairs scraped and people got to their feet, Malik caught snippets of conversation. "They're going to work her to death. It's a setup. He's wanted her gone for months." Lena moved with deliberate calm, picking up her clipboard and schedule sheet. When she passed Malik at the back of the room, he saw the impossible list of room numbers scribbled in neat columns. "You okay?" he asked quietly, still in the role of Jamal, the maintenance guy. She looked at him with a tired little smile. "I've survived worse," she said. "Doesn't mean I don't feel it." He watched her walk out, the door closing softly behind her. That afternoon, he saw her twice in the service corridors. Her steps were faster than usual. Strands of hair had escaped her bun. She didn't stop to chat with anyone. Her eyes flicked constantly to the clock on the wall. By late evening, Malik found her in the laundry area, leaning against a cart piled high with linens. Her shoulders sagged, and her hands were raw from chemicals and hot water. "You didn't clock out yet," he said, checking the time. "It was almost 9. She shrugged. Presidential Suite on 32 had a last-minute request for hypoallergenic bedding and a full bathroom reset. They don't see the time. They just see the towels folded right." He hesitated. "You could file a complaint, about the workload." She laughed softly, a sound with no joy in it. "And say what?" she asked. "That the manager is asking me to work too hard? They'll say I'm not committed to excellence. That's the word they always use." Malik knew she was right. He had used that word himself in shareholder letters. That was the moment he realized talking to her as Jamal wasn't enough. That night, after another call with Ezra, they set a plan in motion. "Document everything," Ezra instructed. "Schedules, emails, incident reports. Don't just prove he's cruel. Prove he's systematic. Courts love patterns." "I'm not thinking about a courtroom yet," Malik admitted. "I'm thinking about my people." "Your people," Ezra repeated. "That's the first time you've said it like that in years, man. About time." Over the next 3 days, Malik became a ghost with a purpose. He switched out light bulbs in a hallway, while Trevor berated a young housekeeper named Amara for not smiling enough in front of guests. He pretended to check the smoke detector in a staff break room, while a junior manager made a joke about needing more presentable faces at the front desk. He repaired a loose doorknob in the small HR office, while a stack of unresolved anonymous complaints sat in a tray labeled "To Review," gathering dust. He watched Lena work. She refused to cut corners, even with the impossible workload. She moved quickly but carefully, checking under beds, smoothing every wrinkle from the duvet, lining up toiletries with military precision. She corrected a new employee who tried to skip a step, but she did it gently, teaching instead of scolding. "She's like a supervisor already," Amara whispered once when Lena walked ahead. "But they won't give her the title. They like her where she is, useful and quiet." By Wednesday, Malik's notebook was full. Times, dates, quotes, faces. The pattern was undeniable. The harshest shifts and most demeaning tasks went to the same group of employees, always for reasons that sounded professional on paper. That evening, heavy rain drummed on the roof of the underground parking lot as Malik stepped outside. Most staff had already left. The city lights blurred in puddles. He saw Lena ahead, walking slowly toward the bus stop across the street. Her uniform was hidden under a thin coat that did little to keep out the cold. Her work shoes squelched slightly as she walked through a shallow puddle. "Lena," he called. She turned, surprised. "Jamal? You're still here?" "Yeah," he said, jogging to catch up. I wanted to talk to you, just for a minute." She looked around automatically, a habit Malik recognized from his own past. People at the bottom always checked to make sure they weren't breaking some unwritten rule. "We're off the clock," she said finally. "I guess that's allowed." They stood under the meager shelter of the bus stop awning. Neon lights from a nearby diner flickered, painting the wet street in red and blue streaks. "I've seen the way he treats you," Malik said quietly. "Trevor, the schedules, the inspections, the way he talks to you in front of others. It's not right." Her eyes softened, but her expression remained guarded. "I appreciate you saying that," she replied. "But appreciation doesn't pay bills, doesn't change evaluations, doesn't stop someone like him from deciding I'm no longer a good fit for the brand." "What if someone higher up knew?" Malik pressed. "Really knew, with proof." She gave him a long look. "Jamal," she said slowly, "men like Trevor don't get where they are by accident. Someone up there put him there. Someone up there likes what he does, even if they don't want to see the details." She smiled sadly. "And if they don't like it, they move him quietly to another hotel. They don't fix the system." "I've watched that dance for 15 years. Malik swallowed hard. "What if," he asked softly, "for once the person at the very top decided to fix it?" She chuckled, a sound tinged with disbelief. "Then that would be something," she said. "But I don't waste my prayers on miracles and suits anymore. I save them for my kids." The bus's headlights appeared in the distance. She tightened her grip on her bag. "Thank you for caring, Jamal," she added. "It means more than you think. Just be careful. This place has a way of chewing up anyone who asks too many questions. She stepped onto the bus and disappeared into the dim interior, leaving Malik alone in the rain, with a decision that no longer felt optional. Back in the apartment, he sent Ezra everything. Photos of schedules, copies of memos he had accessed with owner-level credentials, transcriptions of conversations, even footage from security cameras that captured Trevor's worst moments. An hour later, Ezra called back. "Malik, this isn't just enough for a complaint," he said. "This is enough to rewrite the policies of your whole chain." "I don't want a quiet settlement," Malik replied. "I want this to mean something. For Lena. For everyone like her." "Then we don't just go legal," Ezra said. "We go strategic. You handle the inside, I'll handle the outside. When we hit, it has to be at the exact moment he thinks he's untouchable." 2 days later, Trevor unwittingly chose that moment himself. At a Friday investors' cocktail reception, Malik stood again in the lobby, this time still in his maintenance disguise but wearing a hidden recording device Ezra had insisted on. Crystal glasses clinked. Laughter floated under the chandelier. A jazz trio played soft music near the bar. Trevor stood with a group of suited men and women, one hand wrapped around a glass of aged scotch, the other tucked casually into his pocket. "Old-timers like her are a problem," Malik heard him say, his tone almost bored. "You give them stability and they start thinking they're owed something. Respect, promotions, special treatment." One of the investors shifted uncomfortably. "She's been there a long time, hasn't she? I heard she trained half your current staff." "Exactly," Trevor replied. "They start feeling indispensable, especially the ones from those neighborhoods. They don't have the, how shall I put it, the intellectual range for more sophisticated roles, but they get it in their heads that they could be managers." He laughed lightly and took a sip. "In truth, we're doing her a favor, keeping her where she is. Imagine the mess if someone like that were making decisions." The investor tried to change the subject, but Trevor kept going, the alcohol loosening his tongue. "These diversity people don't understand," he said. "This is hospitality. There's a certain image to uphold. Guests don't want to see certain faces too close to the brand. Housekeeping is fine, it's respectable work. But higher than that, it's not realistic." Malik felt something white-hot ignite in his chest. He forced himself to stay still, to breathe, to remember Ezra's words. "You need him to bury himself. Don't interrupt the shoveling." By the time the night ended, Malik knew one thing with absolute clarity. Monday would not be just another day at the Crown Meridian. Monday would be Judgment Day, and Trevor Langford had no idea the executioner was the man he'd been walking past all week without so much as a second glance. Monday dawned crisp and clear, the kind of bright autumn morning travel blogs love to photograph. Inside the Crown Meridian, however, the air vibrated with a strange tension. Staff whispered more than usual. Guests lingered at the edges of conversations, sensing that something was brewing beneath the usual polished routine. At 8:30, housekeeping gathered once more in the basement meeting room. Malik stood in his usual spot at the back, next to the outlet he had already fixed twice. Trevor entered with a folder under his arm and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Good morning," he said. "Today, we're doing something special." He dropped the folder on the table with a theatrical thud. "We'll be conducting a live quality audit," he announced. "It will be filmed and broadcast on our internal system as a training tool for all properties. Our investors love to see our standards in action." A few worried glances passed between staff. "Lena," Trevor continued, "as our most experienced housekeeper, you'll be demonstrating our cleaning protocol in one of the presidential suites." Lena's hands tightened on her clipboard. "Of course, Mr. Langford," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Trevor's smile sharpened. "We'll have cameras in the suite and in the main lobby, where some of our guests and investors will be watching," he explained. "It's an honor, really, a chance to show our best." Malik knew from a copy of a memo he had intercepted that Trevor had already prepared the narrative. Lena would fail the inspection in some way, proving that she was no longer meeting the demands of her role. The footage would serve as documentation. The termination letter was probably already drafted. But there was something Trevor didn't know. The owner of the entire hotel chain was no longer watching from a safe office downtown. He was standing in the basement, wearing a maintenance uniform, with a lawyer waiting upstairs and a stack of evidence ready to explode. When the meeting ended, Malik caught Lena's eye as people filed out. "You don't have to be perfect," he said softly. She gave a small, bitter smile. "Perfection is the only thing keeping a roof over my head," she replied. "I don't have the luxury of mistakes." Upstairs, the lobby had been rearranged. A large screen had been set up near the bar, showing a live feed from a presidential suite on the top floor. A few investors and high-status guests gathered, curious. Staff from other departments lingered at a distance, pretending to dust or straighten magazines. At 10:30 sharp, the show began. On the screen, Lena appeared in the doorway of Suite 3001, her cart parked neatly outside. She greeted the cameraman with a polite nod, then began her routine. She worked with practiced efficiency, stripping beds, checking under furniture, sanitizing surfaces, replacing toiletries, lining up everything with the kind of precision that would humble a drill sergeant. In the lobby, Trevor stood front and center, hands clasped, narration ready. "As you can see," he said to the assembled group, "our staff are trained to follow a detailed protocol. Of course, any deviation from that protocol is noted." Malik watched from the side, his heart pounding but his face calm. He had changed out of the maintenance overalls. Now he wore a charcoal suit, crisp white shirt, and a tie in the deep royal blue that had become synonymous with the Davenport hospitality brand. He looked exactly like the man who had appeared on magazine covers and business profiles, but most of the staff had never seen him in person. To them, the man in the suit was a stranger, for now. Trevor glanced around to make sure the audience was paying attention, then subtly pointed at the screen. "Notice the time," he said. "Our benchmark for a presidential suite is 45 minutes. If she takes longer, it suggests she's struggling with the pace required at this level." On the screen, Lena moved to the bathroom, checking the grout lines, the corners, the drains. Her shoulders were tense, but her eyes were focused. Malik knew that Trevor had instructed the camera operator to zoom in on any misstep. At minute 43, having completed the full procedure, Lena stood near the door, double-checking her checklist. Trevor's smile grew thin. "Let's see if she remembered our high-touch surfaces," he said loudly. "Door handles, light switches, remote controls." On the screen, Lena turned back into the room, scanning for anything she might have missed. That was when Malik stepped forward. "Before we evaluate anyone," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the lobby, "I'd like to introduce myself." All eyes turned to him. Trevor blinked. For a heartbeat, he seemed genuinely confused. Then recognition sparked in his eyes, followed quickly by panic. "Ladies and gentlemen," Malik said, stepping into the center of the lobby. "My name is Malik Davenport. I own this hotel, and the entire Davenport Meridian chain." Silence fell like a dropped curtain. The pianist stopped playing. Someone gasped. A glass clinked against marble as a guest nearly dropped it. Several employees straightened instinctively, as if their spines had been pulled by invisible strings. Trevor went pale. "Mr. Davenport," he stammered, I didn't know you were—" "That much is obvious," Malik replied calmly. From the far side of the lobby, the doors opened. Ezra Cole walked in, tailored suit impeccably pressed, leather briefcase in hand. Two uniformed court officers followed him, their presence subtle but unmistakable. Trevor swallowed visibly. "Mr. Davenport, if this is about a misunderstanding with Miss Brooks—" "Misunderstanding," Malik repeated softly, tasting the word like poison. "That's an interesting way to describe 3 weeks of targeted harassment, racially coded comments, and a meticulously planned attempt to force a loyal employee out under the guise of performance issues." He turned slightly. Ezra opened his briefcase and began handing out folders, one to Trevor, one to a representative from the investors group, one to the HR director who had just entered the lobby, face already flushed with dread. "In those folders," Malik said, "you'll find copies of schedules that disproportionately assign the heaviest and least desirable workloads to black staff. You'll find transcripts of comments made by Mr. Langford regarding old-timers from certain neighborhoods and their so-called limited intellectual capacity. You'll find incident reports buried in HR, never properly investigated." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Trevor flipped through the file, his hands trembling. This is taken out of context," he protested weakly. "You can't." Malik pulled a small recorder from his pocket. Context, he said. Let's provide some. He pressed play. Trevor's own voice filled the lobby, captured with crystal clarity from Friday's cocktail reception. Old-timers like her are a problem. They don't have the intellectual range for more sophisticated roles. We're doing her a favor keeping her where she is. Guests don't want to see certain faces too close to the brand. Gasps. A woman from the investor group covered her mouth. One of the receptionists looked like she might cry. Another looked like she might punch something. Trevor's face turned a deep, mottled red. That was a private conversation, he blurted. You were spying on me. I was protecting my employees, Malik corrected. Something you failed to do as a manager in my company. Ezra stepped forward, voice steady and crisp. Mr. Langford, he said, you are hereby served with notice of termination for cause, effective immediately, for gross misconduct in violation of company policy. He handed Trevor another document. You are also being named in a civil suit for systematic racial discrimination, harassment, and the creation of a hostile work environment. Ms. Lena Brooks, along with several other employees, will be listed as plaintiffs. The suit is being filed with extensive supporting evidence. Trevor stared at the papers as if they were written in a language he didn't recognize. You can't do this, he whispered. Oh, but we can, Ezra replied. And we are. Trevor turned desperately toward Malik. I upheld your standards, he said. I protected your brand. You brought me in for that. Malik's expression barely changed. The only standards you upheld, he said, his voice quiet but cutting, were those of prejudice and arrogance. You turned my hotel into a place where people like me used to be told to know their place. He glanced around, meeting the eyes of the staff who had gathered, of the guests who were still recording on their phones. That ends today. He nodded to the security guards. Please escort Mr. Langford from the premises, he said. He is no longer an employee of this company and is not permitted to access any Davenport properties until further notice. For a moment, Trevor didn't move. Then the guards gently but firmly took him by the arms and guided him toward the doors. His protests, half-formed phrases about loyalty, misunderstanding, political correctness, faded as the heavy glass doors closed behind him. The lobby remained utterly silent. On the screen in Suite 3001, Lena still stood with her checklist, unaware of the drama unfolding downstairs. Her cleaning complete, she gave the camera a small professional nod and stepped into the hallway. Cut the feed, Malik ordered. The image blinked out. Where is Ms. Brooks now? He asked. On 30, someone replied, waiting for the next assignment. Tell her to come down, he said. Please. Minutes later, the elevator doors opened, and Lena stepped hesitantly into the lobby. Her cart left upstairs, her eyes scanning the room. She saw the assembled crowd, the screen, the discarded folders on the floor, Trevor's absence. She saw Malik. Not as Jamal the maintenance guy, as Malik Davenport, the man whose name was embossed on every key card in the building. For a moment, shock flickered across her face. Then something else. Understanding. You, she whispered. He walked toward her, the distance between them shrinking with each step, not just in the lobby, but across 20 years and 3 bus rides a day and 1,000 overlooked kindnesses. Lena, he said softly, I owe you an apology, and much more than that. You don't owe me anything, Mr. Davenport, she replied automatically, the reflex of someone used to not expecting justice. Oh, I do, he said. I owed that boy from Westbrook Towers a promise that I would never let my success become someone else's prison. I broke that promise without even realizing it. You reminded me. Her eyes filled with tears. You heard, she whispered, in the corridor, when I said you reminded me. I've heard every word, he answered. The ones they said about you, the ones they said about people like us. And from now on, I intend to make sure those words have consequences. He turned to the staff, to the guests, to the investors. This hotel, he said, his voice steady and clear, will not be a place where loyalty is repaid with humiliation. It will not be a place where talent is ignored because of zip codes or skin color. If that offends anyone's sensibilities, you're welcome to check out. Permanently. A ripple of emotion moved through the room. A cleaning supervisor began to clap, hesitantly at first, Then, with growing conviction, a front desk agent joined in. A chef in a stained white jacket added his hands to the chorus. Within seconds, the sound of applause filled the lobby, echoing off the marble and glass, washing over Lena like a wave. She stood, stunned, as the world finally seemed to tilt in her direction. Somewhere deep inside, a belief she had buried long ago. That change was possible, that someone at the top might actually care, struggled to life. Lena, Malik said when the applause subsided, I would like you to come to my downtown office this week. We have a lot to discuss. What about? She asked, dazed. About how to make sure no one else goes through what you went through, he replied. About how to build policies that actually protect people. About how a woman who kept this place running from the shadows for 15 years can finally step into the light. She looked at him for a long moment. Are you serious? She whispered. Dead serious, he said. I went undercover to understand what was happening in my own house. Thanks to you, I finally do. Now I need your help to fix it. In that moment, something passed between them that had nothing to do with contracts or lawsuits or investor calls. It was a quiet pact, formed between two people who had once ridden the same bus from the same concrete towers, who had taken diverging paths but still carried the same invisible scars. The boy who had escaped the system, the woman who had survived inside it. Together, they were about to do something neither could have done alone. 6 months later, the Crown Meridian Ballroom did not look like a place built for empty speeches. It buzzed with an energy that felt different from typical corporate events. Instead of a sea of identical suits and careful smiles, the room held a mix of business leaders, community organizers, students in borrowed blazers, and hotel staff in their best clothes. On stage, the Davenport Hospitality logo glowed against a backdrop with 3 simple words beneath it: Second Chance Initiative. At the center of the stage, under soft golden lights, stood a woman in a tailored navy suit with a small silver brooch at her lapel. Her name badge now read, Lena Brooks, Director of People and Culture, Davenport Hospitality. She adjusted the microphone, took a slow breath, and looked out at the audience. When I started working at the Crown Meridian 15 years ago, she began, I never imagined I'd stand here tonight. Her voice was firm, steady, carrying easily to the back of the room. I was a single mother from Westbrook Towers with 3 children, a high school diploma, and a uniform that came with sore feet and invisible labor. My job was simple: make the room spotless, keep my head down, and be grateful for a paycheck. In the front row, Malik watched her with quiet pride. Beside him sat Ezra, arms crossed, mouth curved in a small smile. On Malik's other side, a group of housekeepers from different properties leaned forward in their chairs, their faces filled with a mix of awe and recognition. You know what I thought back then? Lena continued. I thought that the people at the top didn't see us, that even if they saw us, they didn't care. We were names on a schedule, bodies filling a uniform. Replaceable. She paused, and for a long time I was right. A ripple of soft laughter rolled across the room, tinged with something heavier. Last year, she said, I was publicly humiliated in the lobby of my own workplace, in front of guests, co-workers, and strangers with phones in their hands. I was accused of theft, searched, shamed, not because there was proof, but because someone decided that people like me are easier to suspect than to trust. She looked down for a moment, gathering herself. That morning could have ended like so many others, with a quiet memo, a quiet firing, a quiet replacement. Another story of injustice tucked into the corners of the industry. She lifted her gaze again, and her eyes found Malik's. But it didn't, because someone at the top was watching, not from an office with a view, but from the same linoleum corridors where we push our carts and carry our tools. A murmur of acknowledgement flowed through the staff section. They had all heard the story. Some had lived their own versions of it. Mr. Davenport, she said, didn't just fire one manager and call it a day. He didn't buy silence. He did something much harder. He admitted that the problem lived inside his own walls, inside his own policies, inside his own blind spots. Malik felt the truth of that land inside his chest. He had never been more exposed than during those first weeks of change, explaining to investors why he was spending money on diversity audits instead of expanding to new markets, facing down board members who thought it was bad PR to admit they'd failed. But he had also never felt more aligned with the kid he used to be. Together, Lena went on, we built something new. Not perfect, not finished, but real. She gestured toward a group seated on the left, where young people in modest suits and dresses sat with scholarship folders on their laps. The Second Chance Initiative has, in 6 months, provided education grants, paid training, and mentorship programs to over 200 people from neighborhoods like mine, she said. People who were told they should be grateful just to clean the floors now have pathways to management, to corporate roles, to ownership. Ezra took the microphone next, presenting numbers that made the business leaders in the room sit up straighter. A 70% increase in employee satisfaction surveys, a steep drop in turnover, a measurable rise in guest ratings mentioning kind staff and welcoming atmosphere. Here's the part some of you came for, he added dryly. Revenue for the Davenport chain is up 15% year over year. Turns out treating people like human beings is good business. Laughter, then applause. Later during the reception, Malik slipped out onto the balcony to breathe. The city stretched before him, glittering with 1,000 points of light. Somewhere out there were the towers they had grown up in, still standing, still filled with kids who needed to believe that their lives could reach beyond their postcode. He heard the door open behind him. You always disappear to balconies when things go well? Lena teased. He smiled without turning around. Helps me remember I'm not dreaming. She joined him at the railing, the night breeze tugging gently at a few strands of hair that had escaped her neat style. You did good tonight, he said. We did good, she corrected. You know, my twins were in the audience. They've never seen me on a stage before. For years, they thought I spent my days just cleaning rooms. Tonight, they saw me change rooms of a different kind. That matters, Malik said quietly. More than the headlines. She studied him for a long moment. You know who came by my office last week? She asked finally. Trevor. Malik raised an eyebrow. He had the nerve to show up here? He didn't come inside, she replied. He waited across the street by the coffee cart. Said he wanted to talk. Said he'd lost everything. Said he deserved a second chance. What did you tell him? Malik asked, genuinely curious. I told him second chances aren't about erasing consequences, she said. They're about what you do with the lesson. And I told him that while I believe people can change, I won't sacrifice other people's safety to test his sincerity. She looked at Malik, eyes clear. He wanted a shortcut to redemption, she added, but he never did the work. Malik exhaled slowly. Ezra tells me his lawsuit against us was thrown out almost immediately, he said. Judge said the evidence against him was overwhelming. Apparently trying to play the victim after years of being the bully doesn't impress the court. Lena chuckled softly. Maybe one day he'll realize the truth, she said. The energy he spent pushing people down could have built something. Could have built him even. They fell into a comfortable silence, watching the traffic below, the swirl of taillights and street lamps. You know, Malik said after a while, people keep asking me what changed, why I suddenly care about all this inclusion and equity. And what do you tell them? She asked. I tell them the truth, he replied, that I spent years climbing out of a hole and forgot to look back down to see who was still stuck there. That I became the kind of executive who reads reports but doesn't feel stories. And that one morning, a black maid in my own lobby looked at me and said, You remind me. He smiled. And I couldn't ignore that, he added, because she reminded me of who I used to be and who I promised I'd never become. Lena's eyes shone. That's the only reason I agreed to take this job, you know, she said. Director of People and Culture. Fancy title. Scary responsibilities. I told myself I'd only do it if you were serious. Really serious. About building a place where a girl like I used to be doesn't have to survive what I survived. And, he asked, verdict so far? She looked back through the glass doors at the crowded ballroom, at the scholarship recipients practicing handshakes with executives, at the housekeepers in their best clothes laughing freely with front desk staff, at the poster boards lining the walls with photos of new training programs and partnerships with local schools. It's messy, she admitted. It's hard. We make mistakes. We unlearn things. We argue. But for the first time in my career, I see a company trying to be better, not just look better. She leaned on the railing and added, almost to herself, and that's worth every sleepless night. Over the following year, the transformation spread. Other hotel chains took notice. Some came just to copy the PR. Others truly wanted to change. Davenport Hospitality became a case study in business schools, not for its expansion strategy, but for how one uncomfortable moment in a lobby had sparked systemic reform. Meanwhile, Trevor's name became synonymous online with a cautionary tale. The video of his confrontation in the lobby had gone viral. Comment sections turned his quotes into memes, but also into serious discussions about who gets to lead and why. Funny thing about power, Lena remarked in an interview on a popular podcast. When it's borrowed from a title, a family, a biased system, it can be taken away just as easily. Real power, the kind that lasts, comes from how you treat people who can't give you anything in return. The host asked her if she forgave Trevor. I forgave him for my sake, she said. I won't carry him in my heart forever. But forgiveness doesn't mean putting him back in charge of people's livelihoods. The plaque in the Crown Meridian lobby now bore new words, placed at eye level where guests and staff passed it every day, in honor of every worker who was ever told to know their place and chose to stand tall anyway. Below the inscription were two names, Malik Davenport, founder Lena Brooks, director of people and culture. Tourists stopped to read it. Some took photos. Housekeepers straightened their uniforms when they walked past. Receptionists who once dreaded staff meetings now volunteered for culture committees. One evening, as the lobby buzzed with a new wave of arrivals, a young housekeeper stopped Lena near the elevators. Ms. Brooks, she said shyly. Yes? Lena replied, turning with a smile. I just wanted to say, I watched the video, the young woman said, of that day, of what Mr. Davenport did, of what you did after. I applied here because of that, because I wanted to work somewhere I could be more than just a uniform. Lena's throat tightened. What's your name? She asked gently. Keisha, the girl replied, from Eastbridge Projects. Lena felt a strange, beautiful ache in her chest. Welcome, Keisha, she said. Let's make sure this place is worthy of your faith. She watched the girl head toward the staff elevators, shoulders squared, eyes bright. Later that night, standing once more in the quiet lobby after the noise had faded, Lena found Malik adjusting his cufflinks by the front doors, about to leave. You know, she said, if someone had told me that the man in overalls watching me get searched in the lobby would end up changing my life, I'd have laughed in their face. He smiled. If someone had told me the maid from 3C at Westbrook Towers would one day be the conscience of my entire company, he replied, I'd have said they didn't understand how the world works. So, she asked softly, do we understand it now? He glanced around at the bustling lobby, the diverse faces at the front desk, the respectful interactions between departments, the way security guards now nodded warmly at staff instead of just scrutinizing them. Not fully, he said, but we're closer. Because we stopped pretending the system was neutral. Because we listened when the people at the bottom finally had the space to speak. He paused, then added, and because once, a long time ago, a boy from Westbrook swore he'd build something better. And when he forgot, a black maid looked at him and said 3 simple words that brought him back to himself. Lena smiled. You remind me, she repeated, of who we were, he said, and of who we still can be, she finished. The doors slid open and a family entered, dragging suitcases, children wide-eyed at the chandeliers. A young employee hurried forward to help, greeting them with a genuine smile. The world outside the hotel was still messy, still unfair, still full of people like Trevor in positions of power. But inside these walls, something had shifted, not because of a policy, not because of a PR campaign, but because one man with money decided to use his power differently, and because one woman who had been humiliated refused to let that be the end of her story. If anything in their journey sparks something in you, remember this. Sometimes justice doesn't arrive in a courtroom or a headline. Sometimes it begins when one person in a uniform, carrying a mop or a toolbox, looks beyond appearances, hears 3 quiet words, and decides to change everything that happens next.